The autumn Della came west. The first thing her husband showed her was not the house. It was the barn. Silas met her at the end of the freight road with a wagon and almost no words. He was a broad, unhurried man in a brown hat and a worn leather vest, older and quieter than his letters had made him sound. He handed her up onto the seat, clucked to the team, and drove her past the low ranch house without slowing. He stopped instead at the wide sliding door of the hay barn, and he sat a moment looking at it before he climbed down to open it. Inside, the stacks rose in the cold, half dark like the walls of a second house. It was an open-fronted hay barn, its bays standing open to the weather along the south face. So the rain and sun reached the outer stacks, though the roof kept the rest. Tier upon tier of cured grass, gone gold and gray, packed to the rafters and breathing out a smell that was sweet and dusty and enormous. Della had never in her life seen so much feed under one roof. "This is the winter," Silas said. "It's counted. It's settled." He drew a book from inside his vest. The cover was soft from handling, its corners worn round, and he held it against his chest like another man might hold the deed to the ground he stood on. Each stack in that barn had its own line in the book. He told her, and every line a figure set down in his own hand. 120 head of breeding cattle would feed from these stacks until the spring grass rose in April, and the book swore there was feed enough to carry all of them through. He did not open it for her to read. Della had crossed half a country on a promise printed in a marriage notice, and she had expected a great many things of the man at the other end of it. She had not expected to arrive and find herself married to a ledger. But she had learned to read a room long before she had learned her letters, and she understood at once that the small book in his hands was not only a book. It was something he guarded like an old wound that had never healed clean. That first night, over the fire, she tried him with the plain questions of the poor country she had left. "Is the herd sound?" she asked. "Sound enough," he said. "And the feed for it?" Counted. He did not lift his eyes from the flames. "You needn't trouble yourself over the feed. I have troubled over feed the whole of my life," she said. "It is a hard habit to lay down for a warm fire." He made no answer to that at all. She learned the shape of his silence within the week, and not from him. From the elder of his 2 hired men, she heard it, in pieces, over the wood stove while Silas was out on the range. Years before Della came, Silas had lost most of a breeding herd in a killing winter. He had trusted a hired man's feed count going into the cold, and the count had been generous, and it had been wrong. By the end of February, the hay had run out with 6 weeks of hard weather still to burn through. By March, he had dragged 2 cows out of every 3 dead from the drifts, their ribs standing under frozen hides, their calves gone with them. He had knelt in the snow and sworn over the carcasses that no other soul would ever tally his hay again. Not a neighbor, not a hired hand, and not a wife. So when Della offered, on her second morning in the house, to walk the barn with him and check it against his book, he did not so much as turn from the window. "The winter's counted," he said. "You'll want to see, to the house." She did not go to the house. Instead, she walked the length of the hay barn alone, in the gray first light, her breath smoking in front of her. She had grown up on poorer, hungrier ground than this, where a family that miscounted its feed did not lose part of a herd, but lost the year. She knew hay better than her husband could have guessed from her town clothes. She pushed her bare hand deep into the face of a stack, drew out a fistful, and stood turning it slowly in her cold fingers. The grass along the stack's weather face was bleached and brittle, half spoiled where the open bay had let the rain and sun crawl into it through the fall. Deeper in, it was still sound and green-sweet, and the whole stack, she saw, had sunk. It had settled into itself since the day it was built, the way all cured hay settles, pressing down under its own weight week after week until it stood shorter and tighter than the hour the last forkful landed on top. That was the small thing that troubled her, and then it was not a small thing at all. A stack does 3 separate things in the months after it is built, and each one robs the man who counted it green. It settles, sinking under its own weight, so the bulk a man measures shrinks. It dries, giving up its summer water, so that what fills that bulk weighs far less than the green tonnage he first booked. And along its open weather face and its wet bottom course, it rots to a grey skin the cattle will not touch. But a man who reckons his hay by how tall the stacks stand is pricing the height he piled up in July, not the feed left to him in January. Height does not fall onto a scale, and it cannot be carried in a cow's belly to April. By that evening, Della had made up her mind to weigh it. If you've made it this far into Silas and Della's winter, then you already feel the cold coming on, and you know a proud number can starve a herd as surely as a hard freeze. Subscribe to Dust and Promise Tales, and stay up in the loft with her, because what the scale was about to tell her would decide whether the herd he had sworn to keep ever saw the grass again. She told him plainly, across the supper table, that his stacks had settled since he built them, and that settled hay does not weigh what fresh hay of the same height weighs. She told him she meant to put a fair sample of it on the stock scale by the loft and see for herself what was truly there. "The book's right," he said. His voice did not rise, and that was the worst of it. "I built those stacks with these hands. I counted every one." "You counted them in the summer," she answered. "It isn't summer anymore." He looked at her then like a man looks at a gate he had latched and found swinging open on its own. Then he set down his fork and told her, level and slow, that the barn was his work and the book was his word, and that he would thank her to leave the both of them be. She weighed the hay anyway. For 3 days Della climbed into the freezing loft before the men were up, and stayed there long after they had gone in to their supper. First she measured each stack as it stood now, its length, its width, its sunk, settled height, and set the figures down in her own book. Then she rigged a sling of rope and a borrowed platform on the stock scale beneath the loft door, and cut squared blocks of hay, marked out honestly by the foot, so that a weighed block told her what a true cubic measure of that settled hay weighed now, and not what it had weighed green. The spoiled grey skin she threw down and counted as nothing. The sound feed that was left she measured by the foot and multiplied by the weight she had proved, stack by stack. The work was brutal and cold. Chaff sifted down her collar, and her wrists cracked and bled in the wind that knifed through the loft boards. Her sums she kept in a second little book of her own, a column of honest weights growing longer each hour beside the figures she had copied from his. The 2 hired men watched her from the yard below and said things to one another she was not meant to hear. A wife up in the loft, weighing her husband's winter against his own word, was not a thing they had any place to put. Tom, the elder of the 2, stopped her at the foot of the ladder on the 3rd morning, his weathered face careful. "He'll not thank you for this," he said. The last man who doubted that book was off the place before noon. "I am not doubting the book," Della said. "I am only weighing what it stands for. There is a difference, and I mean for him to see it." Tom looked at her a long moment. Then he reached up and steadied the ladder with both hands while she climbed. Silas did not stop her. He also did not help her. But on the second night, when she came down the ladder blue-lipped and shaking so hard she could barely find the rungs, a lantern had been left burning for her at its foot. Beside it hung a heavy sheepskin coat, too big for her, ready on the nail. Neither of them ever said a word about the coat. She wore it up the ladder the next morning. It was the first kindness that had passed between them, and it passed entirely in silence. What the scale told her, block by patient block, was harder than she had let herself fear. A stack Silas had entered at 12 tons weighed out, carried across her samples at closer to 9. One he had set down as 14 came in near 10.5. Another booked at 11 fell short by better than 2. Every stack told the same story, and every one of them ran in the same direction. The hay had gone up green and heavy in the wet end of the summer, and he had entered it in the book at that green weight. As it cured, it dried and gave up its summer moisture, so that each stack now held fewer tons than the figure standing against it, though it filled the very same corner of the barn. Along the open weather faces, and in the wet bottom course against the ground, the hay had rotted to a grey skin that no longer counted as feed. The stacks themselves had sunk lower than the day he built them, while his book still carried their tall summer figures. 3 quiet losses, the settling and the drying and the spoiling, none of them entered anywhere in his hand, took a full quarter off what the page had promised. It was not that his summing had been careless, his figures had been honest for the day he wrote them down. But hay is a living thing, and it keeps on changing in the stack all through the fall. A number set down in July and never touched again slowly turns into a lie that no one ever told. On the 4th morning she came to him with the page. She laid her column of weights beside his in the lamplight of the kitchen and asked him only to read the 2 columns together. His book claimed 240 tons of hay standing in the barn. That figure, he had always known, was exactly enough and not a pound over. Enough to carry the whole herd from the first snow through to the April grass. Her weights, carried honestly across the length of the barn, came to something near 180. "You are 60 tons short," she said. He did not reach for the page. He looked at it as though it had been written in a hand he had every reason to distrust. "One stack weighs a little light, and you'd have me throw out the whole winter," he said. "That is a woman's arithmetic. You cut into a bad corner, and you called it the entire barn." He shook his head, slow and stubborn. "That book has never once lied to me." "A book cannot lie," she said. "It can only be wrong. And the cattle will not care in the least which of the 2 it was." "Then weigh it with me," she went on. "Every last stack in the row. If I am proved wrong, I give you my word I will never lay a finger on your book again as long as I live." It was the one wager he could not turn down without confessing, to her and to himself, that he was afraid of what the beam would read. So he pulled on his coat and climbed the loft ladder behind her. For a whole short day the pair of them worked side by side, a measured block cut and weighed from stack after stack, while the hired men held the ropes below and pretended, badly, not to be listening for the numbers. Stack after stack came off the scale under his figure. Not a single one of them came in over it. By the failing of the light he had stopped arguing the method. He had gone quiet. He was standing very still in the middle of his own barn, working the long sum in his head that he had refused for 4 days to work, and arriving, ton by ton, exactly where his wife had already arrived. 60 tons short. No man alive knew better than Silas what 60 tons meant when it was measured out in living animals and hard weather. 60 tons was 30 head of cattle that simply could not be fed. 60 tons was his whole herd standing hungry through the last 5 or 6 weeks of the winter. The deep weeks, when nothing showed under the snow and the barn was all the cattle had. His book had promised feed clear to the April thaw. His barn, in truth, would stand empty by the middle of February, with the cold still iron hard and the first calves of the year not yet dropped. It was the very same winter that had killed his herd once before, come around again to finish the work. And this time it had not been a stranger's lie that let it in. This time it had been hiding, all along, inside his own certainty. He stood in the barn before his 2 hired men, and he did not argue, and he did not reach for a single excuse. He took the pencil from behind his ear. He drew one slow line through the figure at the foot of the page, the proud figure set there in his own hand, and beneath it he wrote the true and smaller number. Then he shut the book. "Saddle the bay," he told the elder man, "and hitch the freight team. We're driving to town tonight while the road over the divide is still open to us." The road would not stay open much longer, and Della had come to understand that second half of his fear during her long days in the loft, out of the men's talk and out of the color of the sky. Hay could still be bought down at Cedar Bluff, but its price climbed with the hardening season. In the early fall it had gone for $8 a ton. It stood at 12 now, with the first true snow already overdue. After the first hard storm it would fetch 20, if a team could even be found to haul it. And once a storm shut the freight road across the divide, no wagon on earth would haul a single ton across that pass. 60 tons at $12 the ton was a bitter sum for a man who had counted so proudly on spending nothing at all. Silas paid it out without one word of complaint. He paid the freighters on top of it to load through the night. And he drove the heaped wagons back up over the divide through the first spitting snow. Della sat on the seat at his side, a stub of pencil in her mittened hand, keeping the tally of every ton as it came aboard. Once, over the groan of the wheels in the fresh snow, he spoke without turning his head. "You could have let me find this out in February," he said, "with the herd already going down." "I could have," Della said. "I did not cross half a country to watch you bury them a second time." He drove on a while before he answered. "No," he said at last. "I don't suppose you did." They filled the barn to a true and weighed 240 tons a bare 3 days before the storm came down off the peaks and sealed the pass shut behind them. That winter the herd came through. Every head of the 120 walked out onto the new spring grass in April, gaunt and footsore and alive, and none of them was ever dragged frozen from a drift. The book on the kitchen shelf had 2 columns of figures in it by then, and 2 different hands had written across its pages. Every ton of hay it named had been set on a scale and read, and not one of them had been merely guessed. It was only after the herd was safe on the grass that the warmth came between them, and Silas himself would have been the first to say that the order of it mattered more than anything. He had not come to trust her because she was soft with him, or because she was easy across the table of an evening. He had come to trust her because she had climbed into the killing cold and had been right when it cost her nearly everything to say so out loud. On a still evening after the herd had gone out to the first April grass, he set the book down on the table between them and pushed it a slow inch toward her side of it. "I gave my word once that no living soul would keep this but me," he said. "I was wrong in that, same as I was wrong about the hay in that barn. I'd take it as a kindness if you would keep it along with me from here on." Della turned the book until the lamplight fell square on it. "I will keep it with you," she said, "on one condition. We weigh the barn together every fall, the 2 of us, and we never once trust a number written in it that we have not first set on the scale." "That is no condition at all," Silas said. "That is only good sense. Then it should cost you nothing to promise it." He very nearly smiled. It was the closest she had yet seen him come. "I promise you," he said. Outside, the last of the winter's snow was going soft and gray on the range, and beneath it the first new grass was already pushing up green toward the light. Inside, a man who had once buried most of a herd rather than let another hand touch his count sat beside the woman who had corrected him. He let her hold his book and did not feel $1 the poorer for it. He felt, for the first time in years, that the winter ahead of him was honestly counted. Some marriages are built on how much 2 people can find it in themselves to forgive. Theirs was built, first and always, on what the 2 of them were willing to weigh. Would you have trusted the number you had always trusted, the one set down in your own sure hand and never once questioned? Or would you have climbed up into the cold to weigh it again, knowing full well what it might cost you to be proven right? If tales of the frontier and its hard, honest bargains are the kind you settle in beside of an evening, stay on with us, and let us tell you the next one.